town in America with more than 200 residents, but almost no neighborhoods. Nearly the entire population lives inside one 14-story building. The town is boxed in by mountains, glaciers, and the sea, while its only road connection passes through a single-lane tunnel carved beneath a mountain, and cars must share it with trains. Yet this isolated speck on the map becomes a gateway for hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, arriving for the glaciers and wild fjords of Prince William Sound. This is Whittier, Alaska part town, part building, and one of the strangest communities in America. How did an entire town end up living under one roof? And once those doors close, what does life inside actually look like? Subscribe to Beyond Travel. Whittier is about to get much stranger. Whittier was never supposed to become an ordinary American town. During World War II, the U.S. military was searching Alaska's southern coast for a protected port that could move troops and supplies while remaining difficult for an enemy to reach. What they found here was a place that seemed almost perfectly designed to keep people out. Deep mountains rose directly behind the shoreline. Glaciers surrounded the region. Heavy clouds frequently obscured the peaks, and there was no conventional road through the mountains. Terrible conditions for building a normal community, but remarkably useful for a military base. The harbor offered access to Prince William Sound, while the surrounding Chugach Mountains created a natural barrier. Even Whittier's famously wet, cloudy weather could help conceal military activity from aerial observation. So in the early 1940s, the U.S. Army established Camp Sullivan and developed Whittier as a military port. There was just one problem. The same mountains protecting the harbor also trapped it against the coast. Engineers solved that by boring railroad tunnels through the mountains, linking ships arriving at Whittier with Alaska's interior rail network. And here lies one of Whittier's great contradictions. Its isolation wasn't a problem to overcome. It was the reason the place mattered. The story became stranger during the Cold War, with very little usable land between mountains and sea, and brutal weather making scattered facilities impractical. Whittier couldn't easily expand outward, so it expanded upward. Massive buildings were constructed to concentrate people and services into remarkably small spaces, including the enormous Buckner Building and another high-rise nearby. Then the military left. By the 1960s, Whittier was left with a harbor, railroad infrastructure, enormous concrete buildings, and a settlement created for a purpose that was disappearing. It could easily have become another abandoned military outpost on the Alaskan coast. It didn't. One of those buildings gradually became the center of civilian Whittier. Today, it's called Begich Towers. From outside, it looks like an aging 14-story apartment block. But walk through its doors, and the definition of an apartment building begins to fall apart. Because upstairs are people's homes, downstairs is something else entirely. And once you see what Whittier has managed to fit beneath this single roof, the claim that almost the whole town lives in one building suddenly becomes much stranger than it sounds. Walk through the doors of Begich Towers, and the strangest thing about Whittier finally becomes real. This isn't simply where most residents sleep. Much of the town's everyday life has been compressed into the same 14-story structure. Apartments fill the upper floors, while elsewhere inside are the post office, a small grocery and convenience store, health services, city offices, the police department, a church, laundry facilities, and shared community spaces. In most towns, These places are scattered across different streets in Whittier. Many are separated by hallways, staircases, and elevator buttons. That changes the meaning of an ordinary errand. Picking up the mail doesn't necessarily require stepping outside. Neither does buying a few groceries, visiting a local office, attending church, or running into the police chief. A resident can leave an apartment, descend several floors, take care of several pieces of daily business, meet half a dozen neighbors, and return home without ever experiencing the weather outside. A town usually spreads horizontally across a map. Whittier, in many ways, runs vertically. Then there are the children. Whittier Community School stands nearby rather than inside Begich Towers. But even that doesn't require the ordinary walk to school. An enclosed pedestrian connection allows students to travel between the residential complex and the school while avoiding the worst conditions outside. On a particularly unpleasant Alaska morning, children can leave their apartments and reach class with remarkably little exposure to the elements. Elsewhere, walking to school is part of growing up. Here, going underground can be part of the commute. Children aren't growing up merely in the same small town. Many are growing up in the same building. There is convenience in that, but also an unusual lack of distance. In a conventional city, home provides separation from the rest of town. At Begich Towers, town is waiting downstairs. News travels quickly. People notice when someone hasn't been seen for a while. Privacy exists behind apartment doors, but anonymity is much harder to find. From apartment windows, residents can look across Prince William Sound toward mountains, waterfalls, snowfields, and glaciers, some of the grandest open wilderness in Alaska. While living in one of the most concentrated communities imaginable, few places place such enormous space and such compressed human life so close together. But Begich Towers still hasn't revealed the strangest part of daily life here, because this arrangement isn't merely convenient. For part of the year, it can become remarkably practical. Outside, rain can hammer the town for days. Winds race down from the mountains. Snow accumulates in quantities that would disrupt ordinary life in much of America. The beautiful landscape visible through those apartment windows can suddenly become the very thing that makes stepping outside difficult. And that's when Whittier presents its next contradiction. How can a place surrounded by some of Alaska's most spectacular nature make living indoors feel like the most sensible choice? Whittier doesn't simply have bad weather. Its geography seems almost designed to manufacture it. The town sits at the head of Passage Canal, pressed against the Chugach Mountains and exposed to the moisture of Prince William Sound. Pacific storms arrive, carrying enormous amounts of water, then collide with the mountains rising sharply behind town. The air is forced upward, cools, and releases that moisture over Whittier as rain or snow. The result is one of the wettest communities in Alaska, receiving roughly 200 inches of precipitation in an average year and well over 20 feet of snow, enough snow to bury a two-story house. And snow is only part of the story. Whittier is famous for long stretches of rain, low clouds that can swallow the surrounding peaks, and powerful winds funneled through the mountains. A calm harbor can disappear behind mist. Waterfalls suddenly multiply along the cliffs after heavy rain. In winter, the same landscape that looks spectacular on a postcard can become cold, dark, wet, and deeply unforgiving. This is where Whittier begins to make sense. Compact town isn't simply an architectural curiosity. When snow is piling up outside and wind is tearing through Passage Canal, having your neighbors and many everyday services only an elevator ride away becomes remarkably useful. What looks almost absurd during a sunny summer afternoon can feel entirely logical in January. But Alaska always seems to hide one contradiction inside another, because the weather that makes Whittier difficult also helps create the landscape that makes it extraordinary. Those mountains trap tremendous amounts of snow high above town. That snow accumulates year after year, feeding the glaciers that dominate this part of Prince William Sound. Rain pours down the slopes in waterfalls. Ice fills valleys. Clouds move between peaks so quickly that the scenery can transform several times in a single day. On a clear morning, Whittier can look almost unreal. Blue water beneath snow-covered mountains, boats scattered across the harbor, glaciers visible deeper into the surrounding wilderness. Hours later, the mountains may vanish completely behind cloud and rain. Visitors quickly learn something here. You don't really choose the weather in Whittier. Whittier chooses the version of itself you're going to see. There is another consequence of this geography that is even harder to ignore. Mountains don't merely surround the town. They physically separate it from the rest of Alaska. For decades, reaching Whittier by land was fundamentally different from driving into an ordinary American community. Even today, there is no highway winding comfortably over the mountains. Instead, the road simply reaches the rock and disappears inside it for nearly 4 kilometers. One lane, 2 directions, cars and trains use the same passage. So what happens when an entire town depends on a tunnel that can only handle one stream of traffic at a time? The entrance to Whittier doesn't look like the beginning of a town. It looks more like the entrance to a mine. At the base of Maynard Mountain, pavement narrows and disappears into a dark opening in the rock. This is the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, stretching roughly 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers through the mountain, but its length isn't what makes it remarkable. There is only one lane. That single lane has to serve traffic traveling toward Whittier, traffic leaving Whittier, and trains running along tracks embedded directly into the roadway. Cars and trains don't pass one another inside. They take turns. Traffic lights and a carefully controlled schedule determine who gets the tunnel and when. One period sends vehicles toward Whittier. Another releases vehicles in the opposite direction. When a train needs to pass, road traffic waits again. What would normally be a simple drive into town becomes something closer to an appointment with a mountain. Arrive at the wrong time, and there is no alternate route around it. No mountain pass to try instead. No second highway hidden on the map. You wait. That creates one of the most unusual arrival experiences in Alaska. After driving through the open landscape around Portage, vehicles gather beneath towering mountains and line up before the tunnel entrance. Eventually, the signal changes, engines start moving, headlights enter the dark, and for several minutes the outside world disappears. The tunnel is narrow enough to make its shared purpose impossible to ignore. Railroad tracks run beneath your tires. Concrete walls pass close on either side. Ahead, a procession of red taillights stretches toward a point of light more than 2 miles away. Then the mountain suddenly ends. You emerge into Whittier. Prince William Sound opens ahead. Mountains rise almost vertically around the harbor. Boats fill the marina. Waterfalls descend the slopes. And sitting beneath all of it is a town that was completely invisible only minutes earlier. There are few places in America where simply arriving feels this theatrical. The tunnel does more than create a memorable entrance. It imposes a rhythm on the town itself. Residents know its schedule. Deliveries depend on it. Visitors heading back toward Anchorage have to keep an eye on the time. During the busy summer season, dreams of cars, buses, recreational vehicles, and tour traffic must all funnel through the same narrow passage. And somehow, it works. That's another Whittier contradiction worth remembering. one of Alaska's important gateways to Prince William Sound, depends on a transportation bottleneck only one lane wide. Yet the strangest transformation happens after you emerge from that tunnel in summer. The town we've spent this entire journey describing has barely more than 200 permanent residents. Its harbor, however, tells a completely different story. Cruise vessels arrive, tour boats depart one after another, kayaks are unloaded beside the water, parking areas fill, visitors stream toward the docks, all because beyond this tiny concrete town lies something enormous: Prince William Sound. The moment a boat leaves the marina and enters Prince William Sound, the scale changes dramatically. Prince William Sound covers an immense stretch of protected water along Alaska's southern coast, filled with islands, fjords, forests, and glaciers. And Whittier happens to sit at one of its most convenient gateways. From the harbor, tour boats can reach landscapes that would otherwise require far more difficult journeys into the Alaskan wilderness. If you're lucky, you may even witness calving, a section of ice breaking away and crashing into the sea. It happens quickly. The sound arrives like thunder, followed by waves spreading across water that had been almost perfectly still moments earlier. And that's only one direction from Whittier. Would you rather watch a glacier from the deck of a cruise boat, or approach this wilderness with nothing between you and the water but a kayak? For many travelers, that decision alone could fill an entire day here. Then there is the wildlife. Prince William Sound supports sea otters, often seen floating on their backs in protected water. Harbor seals rest near rocky shores or ice. Bald eagles perch above the coastline, while seabirds gather around productive feeding areas. Depending on the season and location, visitors may also encounter whales moving through the sound, and occasionally, the wildlife appears before you've even properly left town. That's what makes Whittier so unusual as a travel destination. If this is your kind of travel, the places where the story is every bit as interesting as the scenery, then you've found the right channel. There are plenty more places like this waiting for us on Beyond Travel. But before leaving Whittier, there is one place we still need to see. Not out among the glaciers, not across Prince William Sound, right here in town, because only a short distance from the building where most of Whittier is very much alive, stands an enormous concrete structure where nobody lives at all. Its windows are broken, its corridors are empty. Nature and decades of Alaska weather have been slowly reclaiming it. And here's what makes it difficult to ignore. Whittier once had another building designed to contain almost an entire community beneath one roof. One became the beating heart of the town. The other became a ruin. So what happened to the Buckner building? Only a short distance from Begich Towers stands its extraordinary opposite, the Buckner building. Today, its windows are broken, its corridors are empty, and decades of rain, snow, and neglect have turned the enormous concrete complex into one of Whittier's strangest landmarks. But this wasn't simply another apartment building. Buckner was once known as a city under one roof. The scale was remarkable. The complex could accommodate roughly 1,000 people, with living quarters, dining facilities, medical and dental services, a post office, library, chapel, bakery, barbershop, radio station, recreation areas, and even a jail. There was a bowling alley and a theater with hundreds of seats. People could sleep, eat, work, receive medical treatment, worship, and entertain themselves without needing to leave the building. In other words, the idea that makes modern Whittier famous was once attempted here on an even larger scale. But when Whittier's military role declined, Buckner lost the population and purpose required to sustain something so enormous. The military eventually withdrew, and the building was abandoned. The 1964 Good Friday earthquake added damage to a town already undergoing major change. while decades of water intrusion, deterioration, and hazardous materials such as asbestos made Buckner increasingly difficult to reuse. Today, restoring it would be enormously expensive. Demolishing a structure of this size in such a remote location would hardly be simple either, so it remains standing, empty, deteriorating, and unsafe to enter. And that's what makes the scene so unusual. On one side of Whittier, Begich Towers is filled with apartments, families, workers, and the routines of an active town. Nearby stands Buckner, built around an even more ambitious version of the same idea, but completely silent. One city under one roof survived, the other became a ruin, and together they may be the clearest reminder that Whittier isn't simply a town where almost everyone happens to live in one building. It is the surviving half of a much stranger experiment. Whittier is the kind of place that makes much more sense after you've seen it, and somehow becomes even stranger at the same time. On a map, it's little more than a tiny settlement tucked into the edge of Prince William Sound. But arrive here and you find a place unlike almost anywhere else in America. Enormous mountains rising behind a working harbor, glaciers waiting just beyond the coast, and a community whose entire scale seems completely out of proportion with the wilderness surrounding it. Perhaps that's what makes Whittier worth visiting. You can come for a glacier cruise, paddle into the quiet waters of Prince William Sound, watch sea otters drifting offshore, or simply experience that unforgettable moment of emerging from a mountain and seeing the town appear on the other side. Then, somewhere between the harbor, Begich Towers, and the silent remains of Buckner, you realize the town itself has become part of the adventure. And now I'm curious about you. If someone handed you the keys to an apartment in Begich Towers, could you spend an entire Alaska winter here? Or would the isolation have you searching for the tunnel within a week? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know which side you're on. And if discovering places this unusual is why you love travel, subscribe to Beyond Travel. There are still plenty of strange corners of the world waiting for us.